Okay, let's quickly go over what's included in the box for the Dunu Talos. We've got the IEMs and cable, of course. It also comes with a nice assortment of tips, including Dunu's new S&S tips. You also get a nice case, 3.5 to 6.5 adapter, and a cleaning brush. Okay, let's talk about the specifications, design, build, comfort, and isolation of the Dunu Talos. But before we jump in, if you are new to my channel, please take a second, and if you like my videos, please hit the subscribe button. It would be greatly appreciated. All right, let's jump in. The Dunu Talos is a hybrid IEM that comes in at $199. As for the driver configuration, it has two balanced armature drivers that cover the highs and ultra highs, and a full frequency planar driver. A tuning switch on the shell basically allows you to switch the BA drivers on and off, so you can choose between two types of tuning. The switch in the on position activates the BA and the planar driver simultaneously, and in the off position, only the full range planar driver is activated. The shell of the IEM is on the larger side, and it's made entirely out of metal, so it does have a little bit of weight to it. However, it never got to the point of feeling heavy or causing discomfort for my ears. The isolation is also quite good, so there is very little noise bleed, especially when I use the included S&S tips. Cable is also very nice, and of course, Dunu cables are always good, even with their entry-level IEMs. This is a 2-pin cable, and it has a 3.5 termination. It's made from high purity silver plated single crystal and has a fairly soft texture. It's pretty easy to roll up, and because of the texture of the cable, it's fairly easy to untangle. And as for the design of the Talos, it's very unique, but you can almost always expect Dunu to outdo not only the competition, but even themselves when it comes to design and build. It just seems like they're always on the cutting edge when it comes to their design approach, even with their entry-level products. So if you look at the faceplate, it has kind of a teardrop shape, and it even has a ripple or a wave design that follows the contour of the Dunu logo. The black and copper color scheme is very unique also, and it goes really, really well with the gun metal gray cable. Okay, let's move on to the sound. Now, before we jump into the sound, I quickly want to talk about the included S&S ear tips and also another pair of tips that came with the Kima, which are the candy ear tips. Both of these ear tips are really good, and I kind of knew the S&S ear tips were getting really good reception in the community already, and they work great for me as well. But the candy tips just kind of caught me off guard. When I received the Kimas and tried these tips out, I was really surprised at how comfortable they were and how well they fit my ears. So the S&S tips, of course, come with most Dunu's newer IEMs like the SA6 Ultra, Talos, and the Kima, but the candy tips only come with the Kimas, I believe. However, I've got good news, because now you can actually purchase both the candy tips and the S&S tips separately on hifigo.com. So if you're not happy with your current ear tips, or you just want to add to your collection, I would definitely recommend both of these. I'll make sure and leave a link down in the description for both. Okay, let's talk about the sound of the Dunu Talos. We'll talk about the overall sound first, then we'll get into the bass, mids, treble, and then finally we'll talk about technicalities. So again, you have two different tuning modes to choose from. With the tuning switch off, only the planar driver is in use, and with the switch on, both the planar and the two BA drivers are active. With the switch off, in planar mode only, the tuning is neutral, and with the switch on and the BA drivers activated, the tuning becomes brighter, and I would argue a little too treble forward, at least for me. And I will tell you right now that my preference is with the switch off, because planar mode just seems to be the most versatile with my music library. But going back to hybrid mode, while there was added detail and air in hybrid mode, it was just a little too much, again, for me. The notes sounded sharp and even a little peaky, and eventually it just got to the point of becoming fatiguing. Another thing I noticed in hybrid mode was that the instruments and even female vocals sounded slightly thin and unnatural. And I have to say, I'm not sure what Dunu was trying to achieve here with the hybrid tuning, other than maybe trying to compensate for the lack of upper treble presence in planar mode. And maybe they're also trying to offer a couple of different tuning options, maybe in an attempt to appeal to a broader range of consumers and markets, because I'm sure there are those out there that this type of tuning will appeal to, but for me personally, the hybrid modes tuning is just not my cup of tea. But let's pause for a second and, figuratively speaking, flick the switch and focus on planar mode. As I mentioned, of the two modes, planar mode is my preference. But here's the thing, the tuning in planar mode isn't just pretty good, it's actually very good. And I would argue possibly one of the best in this price range, rivaling some of the best out there like the Timeless or S12. So the tuning in planar mode is great. So my experience with the two tuning modes could not be more different. And for the sake of time, I'm going to focus the rest of my review on planar mode, since that was my preferred mode. We'll talk about the bass of the Talos first, starting with the sub bass. It has a sub bass focus, so there is an elevation in the sub bass frequencies. It also has really good extension into the lowest frequencies. And as you move up in to the bass and mid bass, there is a very distinct, clean separation between the bass and the mid bass. And that carries through into the mids as well. So there's no muddiness or boominess. And as for overall bass level or quantity, it's just about right where I like it. It could use maybe a tad more bass, but that's a nitpick really. Something else the Talos does well is bass control and speed. So it gives you really good articulation and resolution, especially for the price. Now, when it comes to slam and dynamics, of course, it's not going to compare to dynamic driver style bass, but it's still very good. So just to kind of summarize the Talos's bass, it's a sub bass focused, very clean, and it does not bleed into the mids at all. Okay, and now moving into the mids have just a little hint of warmth, probably due to the slow rise between 400 and 200 hertz. And what that does is it gives it just a little bit of weight to some of the instruments that fall into that lower mid-range. The overall presentation of the mids is very natural and balanced until you start getting into the upper mids and the lower treble area, where those frequencies are pushed just a little bit forward. But even with that elevation in the upper mids, vocals and instruments maintain an overall good level and never sound too forward. As a matter of fact, I would say if anything, vocals and instruments have a more relaxed presentation. And as for detail and clarity in the mid-range, it's very good. It doesn't sound like anything is missing, and generally everything sounds very open and transparent. And regarding timbre, for the most part, the Talos sounds very natural. However, I did notice the presence of just a tad bit of planar timbre, but again, it was very slight and it didn't take away from my overall listening experience. Now, moving into the treble, as you move from the upper mids into the lower treble, instruments and vocals have a good sense of resolution and clarity. However, it's not the best I've heard. It falls just short of the Timeless and the S12, in my opinion. But it's enough to avoid sounding blunted or dampened. And then if you move into the upper treble, as I mentioned earlier, there isn't a lot of upper treble presence in the Talos in planar mode. That means basically you're not going to get as much air as you might like. And as you know, I'm a drummer and I like to hear good sizzle and crispiness and cymbals, and unfortunately I don't get as much of that as I would like. Now, that's not to say it's completely lacking air or sizzle. Again, it's just not as much as I would prefer. I was still able to get a ton of enjoyment out of the Talos. And it's not fatiguing in planar mode, so I was able to have really long listening sessions with the Talos. And as I mentioned earlier, maybe that's why Dunu gives you the option to add some of that missing upper treble. And that's great, because in hybrid mode, it does add some of that missing air and sizzle back. The only problem is those high frequency BA drivers also introduce, again, peakiness and eventually become fatiguing. And lastly, let's talk about the technicalities of the Talos. We'll talk about the soundstage first. The soundstage of the Talos is above average width and is not just comparable, but even wider in my opinion, when compared to a pretty incredible IEM I recently reviewed, the Eiffel Performer 5. And an even bigger surprise was that it even surpassed the Timeless. The Talos also generally comes across as more natural sounding than the Timeless, especially in the mid-range. Now, where the Talos falls short of the Timeless and Performer 5 is in the detail retrieval and resolvability. Both the Timeless and the Performer 5 are just a little better at resolving notes and pulling out those fine details in music. Another area the Timeless slightly outperforms the Talos is in imaging and layering, but again, it's only a slight improvement. That being said, the Talos's imaging is still very good, and instruments and vocals have a very defined space within the sound field. So if you're looking for something with a wide open soundstage, good imaging, and very natural sound, then the Talos is probably your best choice out of the three. So just to kind of summarize my experience with the Talos, again, you've got the two different modes, hybrid mode and planar mode. I prefer planar mode overall because it's just the closest to my tuning preference, and generally I feel is only lacking in one area, which is the upper treble. But here's the thing, when I finally determined that my preference was planar mode and then just spent the rest of my time listening in planar mode, I kind of just forgot about hybrid mode and was able to get plenty of enjoyment in planar mode. And while it may be fatiguing in hybrid mode, it's definitely not fatiguing in planar mode. So long listening sessions were not a problem for me at all. So in the end, my overall experience with the Talos was just awesome. But I guess the question is, would I recommend it? And the answer is absolutely. While it's not the best planar IEM out there, I think it still holds its own among the best. Again, it's well tuned, it has well-controlled bass, beautiful open mid-range, and the design is just excellent. It's also got a great cable. And overall, I just think that the Talos is just a super solid IEM, and it's a very solid package overall for the price, in my opinion. And it comes with a solid recommendation from me. So that concludes my review of the Dunu Talos. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to watch this video. Please like this video, please share this video, and please hit the subscribe button. I hope you guys have an awesome day.